The crystal chandeliers of the Grandview Ballroom cast golden light over 200 wedding guests, all dressed in their finest attire. I stood near the dessert table, watching my daughter Emma in her flowing white gown, radiant and beautiful as she'd always dreamed of being on her wedding day. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a modest navy dress from a department store, nothing flashy but appropriate for the mother of the bride. I thought I looked nice, respectable. I was wrong about how others would see me. When I approached Emma to suggest we take some mother-daughter photos, her expression shifted from bridal joy to mortification. Her voice carried across the nearby tables, sharp and cutting. "Mom, you're embarrassing me. Just sit down and don't ruin my big day." The words hit like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward us, witnessing my daughter's public rejection of her own mother. I felt my cheeks burn with shame as whispers rippled through the crowd. The woman who had raised Emma single-handedly, who had worked double shifts to pay for her college, who had sacrificed everything to give her this perfect wedding, was being dismissed like an unwanted stranger. "Of course, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "I'm sorry." I retreated to my assigned table in the back corner, far from the head table where Emma sat with her new husband Marcus and his affluent family. My hands trembled as I reached for my purse, my face burning with humiliation. The whispers followed me like a toxic cloud. I caught fragments of conversations from nearby tables. "Can you believe she just said that to her own mother? So embarrassing. Poor woman." But worse were the approving nods from Marcus's family, their satisfied expressions suggesting they'd expected this kind of behavior from Emma's low-class mother. I couldn't stay. Not another minute in this room where my own daughter had publicly declared me an embarrassment. I stood quietly, gathered my wrap, and walked toward the exit with whatever dignity I had left. "Margaret, where are you going?" called my sister Linda from across the room. "I'm not feeling well," I replied, not trusting my voice with more words. As I reached the ballroom doors, I glanced back one last time. Emma was laughing at something Marcus's father had said, completely oblivious to my departure. She hadn't even noticed her mother leaving her wedding reception. The doors closed behind me, shutting out the sound of celebration and sealing in my heartbreak. In the privacy of my car, I finally allowed the tears to fall. My hands shook as I opened my purse and pulled out the manila envelope I'd been carrying all evening, the envelope that contained Emma's real wedding gift. Inside was a property deed to a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Maple Heights, the neighborhood Emma had always dreamed of living in. I'd bought it 6 months ago, working overtime and selling my mother's jewelry to cover the down payment. The mortgage was paid in full, $200,000 of my life savings, every penny I had. I'd planned to present it during the reception, imagining Emma's tears of joy, her grateful embrace, the moment when she'd realized that her embarrassing mother had given her the gift of a lifetime. The deed was already signed and notarized, missing only Emma's signature to transfer ownership. I'd carried it with me all day, waiting for the perfect moment to surprise her. Now, staring at the document through blurred vision, I felt something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. Emma thought I was an embarrassment. She wanted me to sit down and stay quiet. Fine. I'd stay quiet about this gift too. The unsigned deed went back into my purse. Some secrets, I realized, were worth keeping. The signs had been there for months, growing more obvious as the wedding approached. Emma had become increasingly distant, embarrassed by my modest lifestyle compared to Marcus's family wealth. I remembered the day I'd offered to help with wedding planning, suggesting we visit venues together like I'd always imagined we would. Emma's response had been swift and cutting. "Mom, I appreciate the offer, but Marcus's mother has connections. She understands the kind of wedding we want." The kind of wedding I couldn't afford, she meant. The kind of sophisticated affair that required social connections I didn't have and money I'd never possessed. When I'd suggested including some of our family traditions in the ceremony, Emma had rolled her eyes. "Mom, those old traditions are so outdated. We're trying to create something elegant here." The final blow had come during dress shopping. While Marcus's mother and sister discussed designer gowns and luxury alterations, I'd quietly offered to contribute what I could. Emma had patted my hand dismissively and said, "Don't worry about it, Mom. The Weatherbys are handling the important expenses." I'd gone home that day feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. My own daughter was ashamed of me, ashamed of where we'd come from, ashamed of the sacrifices I'd made to raise her. But Emma had no idea what those sacrifices had made possible. Marcus Weatherby III had made his feelings about me clear from our first meeting. He was everything Emma thought she wanted: handsome, wealthy, confident, and completely dismissive of anyone beneath his social status. At the rehearsal dinner, I'd overheard him talking to his best man near the bar. His voice carried that particular brand of arrogance that comes from inherited wealth and unearned privilege. "Look at her dress," he'd said, gesturing toward me with his whiskey glass. No wonder Emma turned out so limited in her expectations. Growing up poor really shows, doesn't it? His friend had laughed. "At least she'll be your problem now, not Emma's." "Oh, I plan to keep that woman at arm's length," Marcus had replied. "The less Emma sees of her mother's influence, the better. We can't have that kind of mediocrity affecting our children." I'd stood frozen behind the floral arrangement, listening to my future son-in-law discuss me like I was a contagious disease to be managed. The casual cruelty in his voice, the assumption that my love for Emma was somehow harmful to her future, it had taken everything in me not to march over and give him a piece of my mind. Instead, I'd quietly retreated, carrying the knowledge of his true character like a weight in my chest. Emma had no idea she'd married someone who despised her own mother. Back in my small apartment, I sat in the darkness and replayed every moment of the day. Emma's harsh words echoed in my mind, but they were just the culmination of months of smaller betrayals and dismissals. I thought about the years I'd worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after her father left. The nights I'd stayed up helping with homework while my own eyes burned with exhaustion. The times I'd gone without new clothes so Emma could have what she needed for school. I'd raised her to be strong, independent, and successful. But somewhere along the way, success had turned into superiority, and independence had become cruelty. The woman who'd publicly humiliated me tonight wasn't the daughter I'd raised. This was someone who'd been shaped by Marcus's world, someone who'd learned to value appearances over substance, wealth over character. Sitting in my threadbare chair, surrounded by the modest furniture I'd bought secondhand, I felt something shift inside me. For too long, I'd accepted being treated as less than I was. I'd allowed my circumstances to define my worth in other people's eyes. But I wasn't powerless. I wasn't worthless. And I wasn't going to be anyone's embarrassment anymore. The property deed lay on my coffee table, a reminder of the power I actually wielded. I made coffee and sat down with a legal pad, my mind clearer than it had been in months. For years, I'd been reactive, responding to Emma's needs, accommodating her wishes, bending myself to fit into her vision of what a mother should be. No more. If Emma wanted to be embarrassed by me, then I'd give her some space to figure out what embarrassment really felt like. If she wanted to distance herself from her poor, inadequate mother, then she could see what life looked like without my support. The house in Maple Heights would have solved so many of their problems. Marcus's startup business was shakier than Emma realized, and their current apartment rent was eating up most of their income. The house would have given them stability, equity, a foundation for their future. But gifts given without respect or gratitude weren't gifts, they were bribes. And I was done bribing my own daughter to love me. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, leaving a voicemail for Monday morning. The property transfer needed to be halted immediately. The house would remain in my name until further notice. Emma wanted me to sit down and stay quiet. Fine. I'd be very quiet about a lot of things. I pulled the deed from my purse one more time, studying the legal language that would have made Emma a homeowner. The document represented more than money, it was proof of a mother's love, tangible evidence that even when treated poorly, I'd still wanted to give my daughter everything. But love without respect was just enabling. And enabling had created the cruel woman who'd humiliated me in front of 200 people. With deliberate care, I tore the deed in half, then in half again. The sound of ripping paper was surprisingly satisfying. Each tear represented a boundary being set, a decision being made, a mother finally choosing her own dignity. Tomorrow, Emma would wake up as Mrs. Marcus Weatherby III, believing her future was secure. She'd go on their honeymoon thinking her mother was a minor inconvenience in her perfect new life. She'd return to their expensive apartment, completely unaware that a solution to their financial pressures had been within reach. But tonight, sitting in my quiet apartment with the torn pieces of a $200,000 gift scattered on my coffee table, I smiled for the first time in months. Some lessons were worth their weight in lost opportunities. And some mothers finally learned when to stop giving more than they received. The game had changed. Emma just didn't know it yet. I later learned what happened after I left the reception. My sister Linda had approached Emma during the cake cutting, concern evident in her voice. "Where did your mother go?" She seemed upset. Emma had waved her off dismissively. "Mom's being dramatic. She couldn't handle being around successful people, so she left early." But Marcus had been more calculating in his response to curious guests. When his business associates asked about my departure, he'd spun a narrative that painted me as socially inadequate. "Margaret's a sweet woman, but she's not used to formal events," he'd explained with practiced sympathy. Emma grew up very differently than this. It's natural that fancy crowds would make her mother uncomfortable. The implication was clear: I'd left because I was out of my league, overwhelmed by sophistication I couldn't handle. Marcus had managed to turn my humiliation into evidence of my inferiority, making my absence seem inevitable rather than hurtful. Several guests had nodded knowingly, accepting his explanation without question. After all, it fit their preconceptions about the poor single mother who'd raised Emma. What none of them knew was that the woman they dismissed as socially inadequate had just walked out with the power to change the newlyweds' entire future, and had chosen not to use it. Monday morning, I sat in Patricia Hammond's law office, the same attorney who'd handled the house purchase 6 months earlier. Patricia had been my neighbor's daughter once, a girl I'd watched grow up to become one of the city's most respected real estate lawyers. "Margaret, I have to ask, are you certain about this decision?" Patricia studied the halt order I'd requested. The property transfer was scheduled for today. Emma and Marcus are expecting to take possession of the house this week. "They're expecting what they never knew existed," I replied calmly. "I never told them about the house." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "You bought your daughter a house and didn't tell her?" "I planned to surprise her at the wedding reception." Plans changed. "What happened?" I gave her the brief version. Emma's public humiliation, my quiet exit, the realization that respect couldn't be bought with grand gestures. Patricia leaned back in her leather chair, processing this information. "So as far as Emma knows, she's just living in their current apartment, paying rent, with no idea that homeownership was ever a possibility?" "Exactly. And you want the house to remain in your name indefinitely?" "Until I decide otherwise." I signed the paperwork with steady hands. "Some gifts are earned, Patricia. My daughter needs to learn that lesson before she inherits anything else from her embarrassing mother." Patricia smiled as she notarized the documents. "Remind me never to cross you, Margaret." Emma and Marcus returned from their honeymoon in Bali, glowing with newlywed happiness and completely oblivious to what they'd lost. Emma posted dozens of photos on social media: tropical beaches, luxury resorts, couples massages, romantic dinners. The captions told the story of two people living beyond their means, living our best life. Nothing but the finest for my husband. Married life is perfect when you do it right. What Emma didn't mention in her posts was the credit card debt they'd accumulated for the honeymoon, or the fact that their apartment rent was eating up 60% of their combined income, or that Marcus's tech startup was hemorrhaging money faster than he could raise it. I watched from a distance as they settled into married life, still convinced that wealth and happiness were the same thing. Emma had traded her modest childhood for the illusion of prosperity, never realizing that real security had been within her grasp. They were living paycheck to paycheck, but they looked successful on Instagram. They were drowning in debt, but their apartment was in a prestigious neighborhood. They had no savings, no safety net, no foundation for their future, but they had the appearance of having made it. It was exactly the kind of shallow success that Marcus's world valued, and exactly the kind of foundation that would crumble under pressure. 3 weeks after the wedding, I ran into Dorothy Mitchell at the grocery store. Dorothy had been my closest friend for 20 years, one of the few people who knew about the house purchase. "Margaret," she called out, abandoning her shopping cart to embrace me. "How are you holding up after the wedding?" "I'm doing well, thank you." "And Emma? Has she settled into the new house yet?" The question was innocent enough, but we were standing in the produce section where several neighbors could overhear. I saw Mrs. Patterson from down the street suddenly become very interested in our conversation. "What house?" Mrs. Patterson asked, not even pretending she hadn't been eavesdropping. Dorothy looked confused. "The house Margaret bought for Emma as a wedding gift. The one in Maple Heights." I watched Mrs. Patterson's eyes widen. She lived for neighborhood gossip, and this was premium material, the quiet single mother who'd apparently bought her daughter a house worth more than most people's retirement funds. "I think there's been some confusion," I said calmly. "Emma and Marcus are still in their apartment." Dorothy frowned. "But I thought you said..." "Plans change," I interrupted gently, giving her a meaningful look. "Sometimes gifts don't work out the way we expect them to." Mrs. Patterson was practically vibrating with curiosity, and I knew the story would be all over the neighborhood by dinner time. The rumors reached Marcus within days, carried by his mother who'd heard them from her bridge club. Apparently, the gossip network of well-connected women moved faster than wildfire. I learned about the confrontation from Linda, who'd heard it from Emma during a tearful phone call. "Marcus is obsessed with this house story," Emma had told her. "He keeps asking me what Mom was planning, whether she really had that kind of money, why I never knew about it." Emma had tried to dismiss it as neighborhood gossip, but Marcus wasn't satisfied with that explanation. He'd started digging into my finances, trying to understand how a woman he'd dismissed as poor and powerless could afford a house in Maple Heights. The questions were causing tension in their new marriage. Marcus felt deceived, as if Emma had hidden important information about her family's resources. Emma felt confused and defensive, caught between her husband's suspicions and her own certainty that her mother couldn't possibly have that kind of money. "He keeps saying I should have known," Emma had complained to Linda. "But how was I supposed to know something she never told me?" The irony was delicious. Emma was experiencing the frustration of being kept in the dark about something important, the same feeling I'd had when she dismissed me without bothering to understand what I might have to offer. With the house situation resolved and my financial future secured, I found myself with something I hadn't had in years: options. The money I'd budgeted for Emma's gift was still mine, and I decided to invest it in something that couldn't be taken away: myself. I enrolled in a computer programming course at the community college, something I'd wanted to do for decades but never had time for. At 52, I was older than most of my classmates, but my life experience gave me an advantage they lacked. I also updated my wardrobe, trading department store clearance items for well-made pieces that fit properly and made me feel confident. Nothing flashy or expensive, but clothes that reflected the woman I was becoming rather than the woman I'd been forced to be. The changes weren't just external. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't defining myself through someone else's needs. I wasn't Emma's struggling mother or Marcus's inadequate mother-in-law. I was Margaret Hammond, a woman with skills, resources, and a future that belonged entirely to her. My sister Linda noticed the transformation immediately. "You look different," she said during one of our coffee dates. "Happier." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like myself again." "Any word from Emma?" "She'll call when she's ready," I said. And for the first time, I meant it. Marcus's obsession with the house grew stronger as his financial situation became more precarious. His startup was failing, their credit cards were maxed out, and their expensive lifestyle was becoming unsustainable. According to Linda's sources, Emma had started confiding in her more frequently. Marcus had become fixated on the idea that I was hiding wealth that could solve their problems. "Your mother obviously has money," he'd told Emma repeatedly. "No one just buys a house in Maple Heights without serious resources. She's probably been playing poor this whole time." Marcus had started pressuring Emma to confront me directly, to demand answers about my financial situation. He couldn't accept that he'd misjudged me so completely, couldn't believe that the woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant might actually hold the key to their financial salvation. The pressure was taking its toll on Emma. She'd begun to question her own memories, wondering if she'd misunderstood our circumstances all these years. Had I really been struggling, or had I been secretly wealthy the entire time? The doubt was eating at her, creating cracks in the perfect life she thought she'd built. Marcus's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic as his business failed and their debt mounted. Their honeymoon phase was over, and reality was beginning to intrude on their fairy tale. Emma finally showed up at my apartment on a rainy Thursday evening, looking nothing like the confident bride who'd humiliated me 6 weeks earlier. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes or the desperation in her voice. "Mom, we need to talk." I invited her in, offering tea she was too nervous to drink. She sat on my small couch, looking around at my modest apartment as if seeing it for the first time. "There are rumors going around," she began hesitantly. "About you buying a house." "For me?" "For my wedding." "Rumors are funny things," I replied calmly. "They have a way of revealing what people really think about each other." "Mom, please. I need to know the truth. Did you buy me a house?" I studied my daughter's face, seeing the mix of hope and guilt there. She wanted the house to be real because it would solve her problems, but she was ashamed of wanting something from the mother she'd publicly rejected. "Emma, let me ask you something first. If I had bought you a house, what would you have done with that information at your wedding?" She fidgeted with her wedding ring. I don't know what you mean. Would you have thanked me publicly? Apologized for calling me embarrassing? Introduced me to Marcus's family as the generous mother who'd given you such an incredible gift? Emma's silence was answer enough. "Some gifts," I said gently, "are only for children who respect their parents." She stared at me for a long moment, then stood abruptly. "So it's true. You did buy me a house, and you're keeping it from me out of spite." "I'm keeping it from you because you've shown me exactly how much you value what I have to offer." Emma stormed toward the door, then turned back with tears in her eyes. "You're going to regret this, Mom. When Marcus finds out." "Marcus already knows what kind of woman he married," I interrupted. "The question is, do you?" The door slammed behind her, but for the first time in our relationship, I didn't chase after her to make things right. The financial collapse started slowly, then accelerated like an avalanche. Marcus's tech startup, which had been hemorrhaging money for months, finally ran out of investors willing to throw good money after bad. The company folded on a Tuesday morning, taking with it Marcus's salary, stock options, and professional reputation. Emma still had her marketing job, but her income alone couldn't cover their expensive lifestyle. The luxury apartment, the car payments, the credit card debt from their honeymoon and wedding, it all came crashing down at once. I learned about their situation through Linda, who'd heard it from Emma during increasingly frequent crisis calls. They'd had to sell Emma's car and were falling behind on rent. Marcus had started driving for a rideshare company, a humbling fall for someone who'd once looked down on people who worked service jobs. "She's asking if you might be willing to help," Linda told me carefully. "Not directly, but she wondered if you might know of any opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that come with houses in Maple Heights." So Emma still believed the house existed, still hoped that her dismissive mother might be the solution to problems caused by her arrogant husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd called me embarrassing was now hoping I'd be her salvation. But salvation required humility, and Emma hadn't learned that lesson yet. The neighborhood gossip network that had first spread news of the mysterious house was now buzzing with updates about Emma and Marcus's financial troubles. At the community center where I'd started taking evening classes, the conversation inevitably turned to the young couple who'd fallen so far so fast. "It's really quite sad," said Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who'd overheard Dorothy's comments about the house. "Emma always acted like she was too good for this neighborhood, and now she can't even afford to stay in hers." "Pride goes before a fall," observed Martha Chen, who'd known Emma since she was little. That girl forgot where she came from. I heard she humiliated her own mother at the wedding, added Jennifer Walsh. Told her she was embarrassing in front of everyone. The women turned to look at me, waiting for my response. Word had gotten out about the wedding incident, probably through Linda or one of the other guests who'd witnessed Emma's cruelty. Sometimes people have to learn lessons the hard way, I said quietly, focusing on my needlework. And sometimes mothers know exactly what their children need to learn, Mrs. Patterson said with approval. You raised that girl better than she's been acting lately. The community that had once pitted me for my modest circumstances was now rallying around me, recognizing that character mattered more than money. Emma was learning what it felt like to be judged harshly by people who'd once looked up to her. Marcus's desperation finally boiled over into rage. According to Emma's tearful account to Linda, he'd exploded at her one evening when another bill arrived that they couldn't pay. Your mother is sitting on a house that should be ours, while we're about to be evicted, he'd screamed. She's punishing us because her feelings got hurt at a wedding. Emma had tried to defend me, pointing out that I'd never actually promised them a house. But Marcus wasn't interested in logic or fairness. He was interested in finding someone to blame for his failures, and I was a convenient target. She raised you to be poor and weak, he'd continued, his true colors showing more clearly with each outburst. She wants to keep you dependent on her, wants to control your life by controlling your finances. The psychological abuse was escalating as their circumstances worsened. Marcus was systematically tearing down Emma's confidence, making her question her own judgment and loyalties. The charming man she'd married was revealing himself to be a controlling manipulator who couldn't handle adversity. Emma was beginning to see the man she'd really married, but she wasn't ready to admit her mistake yet. That would require acknowledging that her embarrassing mother had been right about Marcus all along. Emma appeared at my door again, but this time she was crying before I even invited her in. The confident bride was gone, replaced by a broken woman who looked like she'd aged 5 years in 2 months. Mom, I'm sorry, she whispered through her tears. I'm so sorry about what I said at the wedding. You didn't deserve that. I guided her to my couch and waited while she composed herself enough to speak coherently. He's not who I thought he was. When the money ran out, everything changed. He blames you for our problems, says you're keeping the house from us out of spite. And what do you think? I think I made a terrible mistake. Emma looked around my small apartment with new eyes. You lived like this so I could have more, didn't you? You sacrificed so I could go to college, have nice things, dream big dreams. Yes. And I repaid you by being ashamed of you. Yes. Emma's tears came harder. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know how to fix any of it. I reached over and took her hands, seeing my little girl again for the first time in years. The first step is understanding what you did wrong. The second step is deciding who you want to be going forward. What about the house? Was it real? I looked at my broken daughter and made a decision. Yes, Emma. The house was real. I bought it for you as a wedding gift, planning to surprise you at the reception. Her face crumpled completely. And I destroyed it with my cruelty. You destroyed the moment, I corrected. But nothing else is destroyed beyond repair. Not yet. Marcus's final act of desperation came on a Saturday morning when he showed up at my apartment unannounced, his face flushed with anger and entitlement. We need to talk, he announced, pushing past me into my living room without being invited. Good morning to you too, Marcus. Cut the pleasantries. I know about the house. I know you bought it and you're keeping it from us because Emma hurt your feelings. I closed the door calmly and turned to face him. Is that what you think this is about? Hurt feelings? I think this is about a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her daughter succeed without her. His voice was venomous, all pretense of civility abandoned. You're using that house to control Emma, to punish her for marrying someone successful. Someone successful? I raised an eyebrow. Is that how you describe a failed entrepreneur living off his wife's credit cards? Marcus's face went red. Give us the house. We earned it. Emma is your daughter, you owe her that much. Instead of responding, I walked to my desk and pulled out the torn pieces of the original deed. I'd kept them as a reminder of the decision I'd made that night after the wedding. This is what you're talking about, I said, showing him the shredded document. $200,000 worth of property, bought with my life savings, destroyed because your wife called me embarrassing. Marcus stared at the torn paper, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally, devastation. You actually destroyed it? I destroyed the original transfer. The house still exists, Marcus. It just doesn't belong to you. Word of Marcus's confrontation spread quickly through our small community. Mrs. Patterson had seen him storm into my building, and the whole neighborhood knew about his financial failures. When the story of the torn deed made its rounds, public opinion shifted dramatically. The narrative that emerged was one of poetic justice, a greedy, arrogant son-in-law who disrespected his mother-in-law only to discover she'd been holding the key to his salvation all along. The community that had once admired Marcus's apparent success now saw him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and entitlement. Emma's reputation suffered too, but in a different way. People remembered the sweet girl she'd been before Marcus's influence, and they pitied her for falling under the spell of someone so obviously wrong for her. The neighborhood aunties who'd watched her grow up began reaching out, offering subtle support and advice about recognizing red flags in relationships. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself persona non grata in the social circles he'd once dominated. Word of his behavior toward me had reached his former business associates, and his reputation for treating people poorly made him unemployable in a community where personal references mattered. His world was crumbling, and everyone could see that he'd brought it on himself through arrogance and disrespect. The man who'd once mocked my simple dress was now being judged harshly for his lack of character. The end came swiftly once Marcus realized the house was truly beyond his reach. Faced with bankruptcy and social humiliation, he chose the coward's way out, abandonment. Emma called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice hollow with shock. "He's gone, Mom. Marcus is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "He emptied our joint account and left. There's a note saying he can't live with that financial instability and family drama anymore." She laughed bitterly. "He's blaming me for not having rich enough parents." I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness that my daughter was experiencing such pain, but relief that the toxic influence was finally out of her life. "I'm filing for divorce," Emma continued. "He left me with all the debt, all the bills, all the responsibilities. I can't afford the apartment, can't afford the car payments, can't afford anything." The woman who'd once bragged about her wealthy husband was now facing the reality of supporting herself for the first time in her adult life. It was a harsh lesson, but perhaps a necessary one. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know. I was thinking. Would it be okay if I came home for a while? Just until I figure things out?" Home. She was finally ready to come home, not as the successful married woman she'd pretended to be, but as my daughter who needed her mother's help. "Of course you can come home, Emma. You always could." 6 months after Emma's wedding, I stood in the backyard of the house in Maple Heights, the house that had started this entire journey. I decided to keep it as an investment property, renting it to a young couple who reminded me of myself at their age, hardworking, hopeful, and deserving of a chance. Emma was living with me again, working 2 jobs to pay off the debt Marcus had left her with. The experience was humbling but transformative. She was learning the value of hard work, the importance of financial responsibility, and the difference between appearance and substance. Our relationship was slowly healing. Emma had apologized countless times for her behavior at the wedding, and more importantly, she'd begun to understand why her words had been so devastating. She was seeing me as a person rather than just a mother, a woman who'd built a life through determination and sacrifice. The community had rallied around both of us. My neighbors brought casseroles when Emma first moved back home. Former colleagues offered her job leads and emotional support. The network of relationships I'd built over decades proved more valuable than any amount of money. I'd also started dating again, something I hadn't done since Emma's father left. Robert Chin, a widower from my computer class, had asked me to dinner, and I'd surprised myself by saying yes. At 52, I was discovering that my life was far from over. On the first anniversary of Emma's wedding, I made an announcement that surprised everyone, including myself. I was donating the Maple Heights house to Habitat for Humanity, to be given to a deserving family who would appreciate the gift. "Mom, are you sure?" Emma asked when I told her my decision. "That house is worth so much money." "Money isn't everything, sweetheart. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is help someone who really needs it." The recipient family was a young couple with 2 small children, Maria, a nurse, and David, a teacher. They'd been saving for years to buy their first home, living in a cramped apartment while raising their kids and caring for elderly parents. At the house dedication ceremony, I watched Maria cry as she received the keys to her family's new home. Her gratitude was genuine and overwhelming, a stark contrast to the entitlement I'd once expected from my own daughter. Emma stood beside me, tears in her own eyes as she watched the ceremony. "This is what real generosity looks like, isn't it?" she whispered. "Respect is worth more than any gift," I replied, repeating the words that had become my motto over the past year. Later, as we drove home together, Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Mom. For everything. For the house I didn't deserve, for the forgiveness I didn't earn, and for showing me what it really means to be generous." I squeezed back, feeling the weight of a year's worth of pain finally lifting from my shoulders. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you give away, and sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to stop fighting. My daughter had called me embarrassing at her wedding. But in the end, I'd shown her, and myself, exactly what there was to be proud of.